The first time Laurel Whitmore told me to stop being so perfect, she was standing in the middle of a crowded hospital courtyard with tears running down her face, while everyone around us pretended not to stare. I had just handed her the folder that could save her mother's home, her job, and possibly the fragile life she had spent years holding together. I expected relief. I expected gratitude. Instead, she shoved the folder against my chest and said, "Stop being so perfect, Graham. Just stop." Then she turned away as if my kindness had wounded her more deeply than cruelty ever could. I stood there beneath the bright afternoon sun, feeling something inside me break, and when I finally decided to walk away, her fingers closed around my hand so tightly that I could feel her trembling. Before I tell you how we reached that moment, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances, because sometimes the people who push love away are the ones who have spent their whole lives believing they do not deserve it. I met Laurel 6 months earlier at Hawthorne Community Center, an aging brick building tucked between a grocery store and a public library in a quiet Pennsylvania town. I volunteered there twice a week, helping adults prepare resumes, complete benefit applications, and learn basic computer skills. I told people I did it because my accounting firm encouraged community service, but the truth was more complicated. My younger brother, Ellis, had died 3 years earlier after a long struggle with addiction, and during his worst months, strangers had shown him more patience than I had. I had loved him, but I had also judged him. I had lectured him about responsibility, ignored phone calls when I felt exhausted, and believed that if I kept cleaning up his mistakes, he would never change. After his funeral, I began volunteering because helping strangers felt like an apology I could never give my brother. That was where I first saw Laurel, sitting at the end of a folding table with a broken laptop, a stack of overdue bills, and a look on her face that warned everyone not to offer sympathy. She was 31, with short chestnut hair she constantly tucked behind one ear, tired gray eyes, and the posture of someone who had learned to remain standing even while life tried to fold her in half. Laurel was trying to complete an online application for emergency property tax assistance. Her mother, Margaret, had suffered a stroke the previous year, leaving Laurel responsible for medical appointments, household expenses, and the old family home where they both lived. Laurel worked mornings at a bakery and afternoons as a receptionist at a dental office, yet every month still ended with another red notice in the mailbox. When I asked whether she wanted help, she said she wanted the laptop to stop freezing, the county website to stop rejecting her documents, and the universe to stop charging fees for being poor. She smiled when she said it, but there was no humor in her eyes. I fixed the laptop, scanned her paperwork, and stayed until the application was submitted. She thanked me quickly, packed her things, and left before I could ask whether she needed anything else. The following week, she returned with 2 cinnamon rolls from the bakery. She placed one beside my keyboard and announced that she did not believe in owing favors. I told her it was not a favor, but she insisted everything was a transaction, even kindness. According to Laurel, people gave because they wanted gratitude, admiration, obedience, or a future advantage. No one did anything without expecting payment. I wanted to disagree, but I knew enough about guilt to understand that generosity was not always as selfless as it appeared. Over the next several months, our lives began crossing outside the community center. I saw her pushing Margaret's wheelchair along the riverside path on sunny mornings. I saw her standing at the pharmacy counter, quietly removing one item after another when the total became too high. Once, during my lunch break, I found her beside her stalled car in a supermarket parking lot. The hood was raised, groceries were warming in the trunk, and Margaret was waiting at home for medication. Laurel refused my offer to call a mechanic until I reminded her that arguing with me would take longer than accepting help. She stood beside me while we waited, arms folded, studying me with visible suspicion. She asked why I was always prepared, why I carried jumper cables, bottled water, a first aid kit, and enough emergency supplies to survive a minor disaster. I answered lightly that I liked solving problems. She looked at me for a long moment and said people who solved everyone else's problems were usually hiding from their own. The comment unsettled me because it was true. I had constructed my entire life around being dependable. I arrived early, remembered birthdays, paid bills before they were due, and never raised my voice. If I was useful enough, perhaps no one would look closely enough to see how ashamed and lonely I truly was. Laurel slowly began trusting me, though she disguised trust as practicality. She asked me to review Margaret's insurance forms because the terminology confused her. She let me repair a leaking kitchen faucet after it flooded the cabinet. She allowed me to drive them to a neurological appointment when her car needed a new transmission. Each time, she kept a careful record of what she owed. She brought bread, replaced the fuel I used, or offered to organize files at the community center. I never told her that the afternoons I spent with her and Margaret had become the best part of my week. Margaret had difficulty speaking after her stroke, but her expressions were wonderfully direct. She rolled her eyes whenever Laurel became stubborn and squeezed my hand whenever she noticed me staring at her daughter. Laurel was different around her mother. Her sharp edges softened. She brushed Margaret's hair, described clouds through the kitchen window, and played old records during lunch. Watching them reminded me that exhaustion and love could live in the same body. Laurel was not cold. She was terrified. Her father had disappeared when she was 12, leaving debts and promises behind. Years later, the man she planned to marry had emptied their joint account 2 weeks before the wedding and vanished with someone else. By the time I met her, dependence had become another word for danger. One bright Saturday, the community center held a spring fundraising event in the park. Laurel volunteered at the bakery table while I managed donations. Children painted flower pots, elderly couples danced near a local band, and sunlight flashed across the river beyond the trees. For several hours, Laurel seemed free. Flower dust clung to her sleeve, and she laughed when a gust of wind carried napkins across the lawn. I realized I had never seen her laugh without immediately looking guilty afterward. Near midday, Margaret grew tired, so we moved her wheelchair beneath a maple tree. Laurel sat beside me on the grass while Margaret rested. She asked whether I had ever been married. I told her no. She asked whether I had ever loved anyone enough to consider it. I almost gave her the safe answer, but something about the warmth of the afternoon made honesty feel possible. I told her about Ellis instead. I explained how he had called me the day before he died, asking for money and a place to stay. I had refused because I believed consequences might finally force him into treatment. He overdosed the next morning in an abandoned motel. I admitted that every helpful thing I had done since then was partly an attempt to rewrite that last conversation. Laurel did not offer empty comfort. She simply sat closer until our shoulders touched. For the first time in 3 years, I cried in front of another person. After that day, something changed between us. Laurel began calling me even when there was no emergency. We ate lunch on the steps behind the bakery during her break. We took Margaret to outdoor concerts and farmers markets. On warm afternoons, Laurel and I walked slowly through the neighborhood while Margaret napped beside an open window. I never pressured Laurel to define what was happening, but hope grew between us in small, dangerous ways. She started leaving a mug for me beside the coffee maker. I kept her favorite lemon candies in my car. Once, while painting Margaret's porch railing, Laurel reached up and wiped a streak of white paint from my cheek. Her hand remained there for one suspended second, and I thought she might kiss me. Instead, fear crossed her face, and she stepped away. The next several days, she barely answered my messages. When we finally met at the community center, she told me she could not afford distractions. Her mother needed her. Her jobs needed her. The house needed repairs. She claimed that whatever existed between us was only gratitude. I wanted to argue, but I had spent too much of my life trying to fix people who had not asked to be fixed. I told her I understood, even though I did not. The real crisis began with a certified letter from the county. Laurel's assistance application had been delayed because one page was missing a signature, and by the time the error was discovered, additional penalties had been added to the unpaid property taxes. The house was scheduled for a tax sale unless the balance was paid within 30 days. Laurel hid the letter from Margaret, picked up extra shifts, and began selling furniture online. She refused help from me, the community center, and even the bakery owner who offered an advance. Her pride was not arrogance. It was the final wall protecting her from humiliation. I watched her grow thinner and more exhausted. She stopped eating lunch, wore the same coat every day, and developed a tremor in her left hand. When Margaret suffered a minor fall during a physical therapy appointment, Laurel finally collapsed in the hospital corridor. I found her sitting on the floor beneath a window, breathing too quickly, convinced she had failed the only person who had never abandoned her. I knelt beside her and asked her to let me help. She said help always had an expiration date. Sooner or later, people became tired, resentful, or controlling. I told her she was describing the people who had hurt her, not every person she would ever meet. Laurel still refused money, so I searched for another solution. I contacted the community center's legal aid partner, reviewed county regulations, and discovered that Margaret qualified for a disability-related tax exemption that should have been applied retroactively. The exemption would erase most of the debt, but the filing process was complicated, and the deadline was only 4 days away. I spent every free hour gathering medical records, employment statements, property documents, and notarized forms. Margaret secretly gave permission for me to obtain several missing records, communicating through patient gestures and determined nods. The final document required Laurel's signature. I carried the completed folder to the hospital courtyard on the afternoon Margaret was expected to be discharged. Laurel stood near a fountain, sunlight reflecting from the water onto her pale face. I explained that the exemption could stop the sale and that a local hardship fund had agreed to cover the remaining balance. The house would be safe. Margaret would be safe. Laurel stared at the folder as though it contained a threat. Then she asked how many hours I had spent, who I had called, and what promises I had made. When I answered, shame filled her expression instead of relief. She pushed the folder back against my chest and told me to stop being so perfect. Her voice cracked as she accused me of always knowing the right thing to say, always arriving before disaster, always making her feel like a broken object beside someone flawless. I told her I had never believed she was broken. She said that was worse because it meant I saw goodness in her that she could not see in herself. Tears ran down her cheeks as she admitted she had begun waiting for my messages, listening for my car, imagining a future where she no longer carried everything alone. But each hopeful thought terrified her because losing me would prove the lesson she had spent years learning: everyone eventually leaves. She believed it would be safer to reject me before I discovered how difficult, frightened, and imperfect she truly was. I wanted to tell her I would never leave, but absolute promises had destroyed enough people in her life. Instead, I told her the truth. I was not perfect. I was a grieving brother who had turned helpfulness into a hiding place. I controlled details because I could not control the moment Ellis died. I avoided anger because I feared becoming like our father. I solved problems because sitting beside pain without solving it made me feel helpless. For several seconds, neither of us moved. People crossed the courtyard carrying flowers and discharge papers. A nurse guided an elderly man toward the entrance. Water continued spilling gently through the fountain, indifferent to the 2 frightened people standing beside it. I told Laurel I did not want her gratitude, repayment, or obedience. I wanted honesty. I wanted the version of her who became impatient when traffic moved slowly, who forgot to water plants, who laughed too loudly when she was tired, and who sometimes shut people out because fear was easier than hope. I also wanted the freedom to be imperfect around her. I did not want to earn love through endless usefulness. I wanted someone who would remain when I had no solution, no organized folder, and no strength left to pretend I was fine. Laurel looked at me as though no one had ever asked her to stay for another person's weakness. Still, she did not reach for the folder. Her silence felt like an answer. I nodded, wished her and Margaret well, and turned toward the parking lot. That was when she grabbed my hand before I could walk away, her fingers were cold despite the warmth of the afternoon. She did not make another dramatic declaration. She simply said she was afraid and did not know how to stop being afraid. I turned back and told her she did not have to stop all at once. Trust was not a door that opened in a single moment. It was a path built through small choices, repeated over time. Laurel looked down at our joined hands, then asked whether I would still help if she became angry again, pushed me away again, or struggled to believe me. I answered that I would have boundaries, make mistakes, and sometimes need patience too, but I was willing to try if she was. She finally took the folder. We signed the document on a courtyard bench while sunlight warmed the pages. The application was submitted that afternoon, and 2 weeks later, the county confirmed the exemption. Margaret kept her home. Laurel kept her dignity because the solution had not been charity, it had been a right she had never known how to claim. The months that followed were not effortless. Laurel still tried to handle emergencies alone, and I still confused being needed with being loved. We learned to recognize those patterns before they controlled us. Laurel began attending a caregiver support group at the community center. I finally joined a grief group and spoke openly about Ellis without turning his death into a punishment I had to carry forever. Margaret regained enough strength to walk short distances with assistance, and on a clear autumn afternoon, she crossed the porch using a cane while Laurel and I watched with tears in our eyes. Laurel eventually left the dental office and accepted a full-time position coordinating assistance programs at the community center. She became the person who sat beside frightened applicants and reminded them that asking for help was not the same as surrendering. I stopped trying to rescue everyone. Sometimes I fixed the problem. Sometimes I listened. Sometimes I admitted that I did not know what to do. A year after the hospital courtyard, Laurel and I returned to the same park where she had once listened to me speak about my brother. Margaret sat beneath the maple tree, smiling as children chased one another across the grass. Laurel rested her head on my shoulder and told me I had become much less perfect. I said I had worked very hard at it. She laughed, then reached for my hand with the same fingers that had stopped me from walking away. That simple gesture meant more than any promise. It meant she was choosing hope while still feeling fear. It meant I was allowing myself to be loved without earning every second of it. Neither of us had been saved by a flawless person. We had simply found someone willing to remain honest, patient, and present while we learned how to forgive ourselves. Before this story ends, leave a meaningful comment about whether you believe love is proven through grand sacrifices or through the small decision to stay when someone finally reveals their fears. Your words may help another person understand that accepting support does not make them weak, and admitting imperfection does not make them unworthy. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Laurel once believed kindness always came with a hidden price, while I believed love had to be earned through perfection. In the end, we discovered something far more healing. Real love does not demand that people arrive whole. It gives them a safe place to become whole together, one honest afternoon, one trembling hand, and one courageous choice at a time.